Overnight, U.S. Central Command says American and Saudi forces conducted joint strikes against what they are calling Iran-backed terror sites in Iraq. And there is new video of some of the aftermath. We're showing this to you right here. At least 20 people were killed in the strikes. But this is also significant because until now, Saudi Arabia has avoided getting directly involved in the fight in the war. The strikes in Iraq come shortly after the U.S. military said it intercepted a surprise attack by Iran on U.S. forces. CENTCOM says Iran launched multiple ballistic missiles. CNN's Zach Cohen is joining me now. He's got much more on this. And Zach, what are you hearing about the significance or how significant it is that Saudi Arabia is now getting in the fight in this way?
Yeah, Kate, it's potentially very significant. Saudi Arabia has spent 5 months actively trying to avoid getting dragged into this conflict, and it remains concerned, along with the U.S., about it expanding and escalating within the region itself. But look, U.S. Central Command in a statement yesterday saying that Saudi Arabia, over just the last 72 hours, has faced over 30 IRGC-directed aerial drone attacks in just the last 72 hours, and that these joint strikes are intended to send a message and be a response that those attacks will not go unanswered. But it remains to be seen what this means as far as the ongoing efforts by the Trump administration to push for some sort of a diplomatic settlement to end this war once and for all. And it also reflects something that we've reported in the past, that U.S. officials believe Iran now sees its ability to attack Gulf countries and specifically their energy infrastructure, including Saudi Arabia's, as one of its asymmetric capabilities that it can use as leverage to continue to apply pressure not just on the U.S., but its regional partners as well. And as you mentioned, too, those joint strikes by the U.S. and Saudi Arabia coming after Iran launched a new attack against a U.S. airbase in Jordan. This is the first time Iran has conducted an attack since President Donald Trump announced the U.S. was pausing combat operations, at least temporarily, as he tries to pursue a diplomatic agreement of some sort. So Iran really continuing to apply pressure to the United States and its regional partners, even as the Trump administration is still looking to give diplomacy some room to breathe.
Joining me now, David Sanger, White House and national security correspondent for the New York Times. David, good morning. I mean, a lot happening in the last 24 hours, I think, is putting it mildly when we look at what is happening on both fronts with Iran and Ukraine. Let's start, though, if we could, with these attacks overnight and what we saw. The timing cannot be ignored, obviously, but also what has come out of that. The U.S. and Saudi Arabia joining forces now. Can you put this in perspective for us?
Sure. So, last time that we discussed this, Erica, we talked about how the president was increasingly trapped by his inability to get out of this war. And I think in the past 24 hours, we've seen why. He stood down over the weekend from what he had threatened would be a massive attack. It looked like we had some peace in the region for a bit. And then 4 days into this, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which we believe is really running Iran these days, or is the most influential force there, launches this not very large attack. It was 4 or fewer missiles that were at Jordan. Meanwhile, the Saudis, tired of being attacked by the Houthis and some Iran-backed militias, did some airstrikes in Iraq. And so you see that this is beginning to spread, or is continuing to spread throughout the region. And the more countries that get involved, the more difficult it gets to unwind this whole thing. So the whole question right now for the president is, could he even get the Iranians back to the position they were in a little more than a month ago when he signed that 14-point, vaguely written plan that was supposed to launch a bigger negotiation?
Mr. Ambassador, what do you make of the fact that U.S. and Saudi Arabia are teaming up on this?
Yeah, there's a lot going on, and you could add to the mix the fact that the Iraqi prime minister was just in Washington the last couple of weeks telling President Trump that he's going to hit these Iran-based, Iran-backed groups very hard. So we have a situation where instead of Iraqi forces hitting these Iraqi militants, it's the Saudis coming in. And that can't be welcomed at all by the Iraqis, who just had a conversation with the president 2 short weeks ago. So the issue, of course, with the Saudis is complicated because about a week ago, it looked like the U.S. was launching a full civil nuclear deal with the Saudis, and clearly the president got cold feet about it, and he said one condition is the Saudis have to recognize Israel. Well, that wasn't going to work. So a lot going on there, and now perhaps to some extent the U.S. is trying to reconcile with the Saudis and do some things together. But meanwhile, of course, we have Netanyahu feeling very lonely and coming to Washington. I must say this Lindsey Graham funeral has done a lot of diplomacy in terms of bringing Netanyahu and Zelensky to Washington, probably as much as Lindsey Graham could have done if he were alive.
Mark, I'll begin with you because this is the first Iranian missile strike against a U.S. base in the region since the president paused strikes against Iran to give diplomacy a chance. So where should expectations be on Trump's response?
I think Trump's response is going to be a mixture of more tough talk, more sanctions. I think we're in a prolonged period of tit-for-tat strikes. That's the best read that I can get from people in the administration. But the president has, I think charitably speaking, been sort of erratic in his approach to this. At times, he says, we're going to strike them, we're going to strike them hard. Okay, I'm not going to do it. Then he strikes them hard. Then he stops and says, I'm doing this to help talks happen. And the Iranians want it. And the Iranians saying, hey, we didn't ask for this. And the Iranians bomb the United States military bases. So we're in this sort of prolonged cat and mouse game between the two.
Saudi Arabia is, we're learning, carrying out limited strikes with the United States against Iran-backed militias in Iraq that were linked to attacks on Saudi oil facilities. Is this a one-off, or could Saudi Arabia become more involved?
You know, there's no doubt that the longer the war goes on, the more it expands. Regionally, more countries are getting attacked, more countries are attacking. It's a natural outcome of having no strategy to extricate the United States from this conflict. And the erratic behavior of the president to bomb and then talk and then to misrepresent what's going on in the talks and then to misrepresent what's going on in the Strait causes a predictable and predicted outcome, which is that this will get worse before it gets better. And that lack of a strategy is forcing other countries in the region to look out for themselves and to make their own calculations. But we know from past history that when more countries get involved in bombing more countries, that doesn't actually make things better. It actually makes things worse. It actually makes things harder to solve. And now you have the Houthis increasing their involvement. You have the Red Sea being attacked. You've got increased attacks in Jordan and more attacks on places like Kuwait and Qatar and Saudi Arabia. That's not good news. That means the strategy, such as it is not working. And until the administration decides one way or the other to make a deal, whatever that deal is, or to escalate, which Trump doesn't want to do, we're going to leave our fate and the fate of this war and the fate of the world in the hands of a lot of rogue actors, and that's all bad news.
And to add to that list, there's the new leader in Iraq is talking about going after the Iranian-backed militias there. Recently, bases or soldiers, U.S. soldiers, were attacked in Jordan. So yeah, the theater is expanding. The bombs are exploding in more places.
You have some new reporting, Mark, on the war where U.S. officials think that sanctions might be more impactful and useful here.
They base that on, in the talks before the Memorandum of Understanding, RIP, was signed, that brought a measure of peace for a while. The Iranians in negotiations made very clear, obviously they don't want to be bombed, and so there's sort of a tongue-in-cheek idea on the United States part saying, hey, they don't care about getting bombed, they just want money. But the Iranians made very clear that what they want was money as soon as possible, more unfrozen assets, fewer sanctions, more rights and ability to sell oil on the international market. Iran is one of the largest, or among the larger, oil-producing countries in the world, yet it's got gas shortages. It is having problems in its financial sector. Its economists have warned about hyperinflation. So there are a lot of deep economic problems in Iran. The critics, though, of the administration point out that, yeah, sure, maybe all of this is true, but that doesn't mean the Iranians are going to suddenly buckle.
With us now is Congressman Mike Quigley, a Democrat from Illinois. He's on the House Intelligence Committee. Congressman, good to see you this morning. What does this tell you? The fact that President Trump has said that the U.S. was engaged in fruitful talks with Iran, that President Trump has said if Iran attacks, the United States would strike back, destroying bridges and infrastructure. What does it tell you that Iran felt emboldened to launch this surprise attack on U.S. forces?
I think they see the president the way we do, unfortunately, somewhat confused, lost, and somewhat desperate. I mean, at this point in time, what is victory? It seems when you look at the terms of the memorandum of understanding, where we got nothing, that I guess victory wouldn't be regime change. Victory wouldn't be the nuclear program ending. Victory right now would just be getting the Strait open, which it was when the conflict started. So at this point, it's a pipe dream to get to the point under President Obama where we had the JCPOA, where the Iranians were in compliance and not moving forward with the nuclear program. So I think the Iranians are emboldened. They're going to get restocked in their minds. They have time. And unfortunately, there's no way out of this conflict unless the president's willing to accept what can only be described as a humiliating withdrawal.